Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Bookshelf Odyssey. My name is Art, and we are exploring my bookshelves. Welcome to my weekly wrap up. I wasn't quite sure I was going to get a video out today because I've had a cold this past week, as you can probably tell by my voice. And I lost my voice for a couple days there, and it kind of put some of my video projects on hold. But it's starting to come back, and I wanted to make sure I got this out to you all. So I don't get behind on these. I've really enjoyed updating you all on what I'm reading and getting some of the interaction from you on that. To start off with, I've got 4 books to update you with that I finished up this past week. Believe it or not, I have finished 2 chapters in Emma, and I'll talk to you about those as well. So let's dive in. So I have a couple books that have to do about books, which was kind of fun. I realized I was reading in a theme. Last week I read Save Me from Dangerous Men by S.A. Lelchuk, and that had to do with the books. The main character, Nikki Griffin, she owns a bookstore, as well as being a tough-as-nails private investigator who likes to exact punishment on men who mistreat women. Great book. This week I read The Diary of a Bookseller by Shaun Bythell. He owns the bookstore. I think it's called The Bookstore. It's in Scotland. I enjoyed reading his diaries of his experiences, what it's like running a bookstore over the course of a year. And they're more or less daily journals that just give the ins and outs of what it's like to run a business, what kind of customers he gets during the day, some of his employees, and what it's like to, stock bookshelves, where to find material, books, all those things. And of course, all of it, he writes and speaks very bluntly about his opinions of some of the customers and their opinion of things. So it was funny. I loved reading about how a little bookstore is able to make, well, it's actually kind of a big bookstore, I guess. But anyway, I loved reading how this bookstore kind of was waging a one-man war against Amazon and things of that nature. If you ever were curious what it's like to run a bookstore, I would say read this book, especially if you are wanting to open your own bookstore. I think Bythell's books should be required reading, just for no other reason, because then you can see exactly what kind of people you're going to be dealing with when you do that. That would be a dream of mine someday, to run a bookstore, but not in the cards right now, but that would be really fun. I think I would probably end up being my number one customer, though. The other book I read that was kind of connected with books is by Emily Henry, and it's called Book Lovers. This is not the typical book I read. It's a romance, kind of a romantic comedy. I think it dealt more with romance than I thought it would. Although with the book titled like Book Lovers, I don't know what I was expecting. But Book Lovers tells the story of Nora Stevens, whose life is in books, and she's described as, that, in your Hallmark Christmas movie, that, the main character, he's dating this high profile New York City executive, and she's this ice cold woman, and he gets sent to the country where he falls in love with a country bumpkin, and and breaks up with her, and so she's described as the woman who gets dumped for the country girl. Which is a really interesting way of describing a character. But I've always wondered whatever happened to those who get dumped by the Hallmark couple. Anyway, so she kind of has her own Hallmark movie journey. I enjoy the characters, the 2 main characters, Nora Stevens, and then her love interest, Charlie Lastra, and the will they won't they vibe. It kind of felt like Pride and Prejudice, to be honest, between Lizzie Bennet and Mr. Darcy. I love their snappy comebacks. The dialogue was really interesting. I was not expecting quite so much sensuality in the book. Now, I guess I'm a prude. I'm getting to that age now where I find love scenes and things just unnecessary. That's just my personal opinion. If I know people like that, will like that kind of thing, that's fine. I don't necessarily want it in my books, so that part I was not as happy about. But overall, it was good. And like I said, I enjoyed the characters, the kind of almost sarcastic, witty comebacks between the two. That's the part I really enjoyed. To me, you didn't need to throw in all the sensual things, but if you're looking for a romantic and steamy, not too steamy, but it was steamy enough. Well, yeah, it was steamy. This might be the book for you. That's all I'll say about that. And then I read a book called Black Orchid by Laura Burke. I'm really looking forward to, on my podcast, I will be interviewing Laura Burke in an upcoming episode, probably a little bit later in the spring. And so I wanted to read one of her books before then, and I picked Black Orchid. And the book is described in this way. In a small fishing village in Connecticut known as Watch Hill, walking on the beach at sunset has become a rather enjoyable pastime for Wayne Miner. Watch Hill is not a very big village and, in fact, is situated on a small island. It was a very peaceful setting until several mysterious black orchid blooms are found on the beach. Suddenly, the residents begin to die one by one as the quiet town becomes a place of terror. Everyone begins to wonder where the blooms are coming from and who is behind, leaving them for the residents to find. Nobody is safe from the deadly blooms. Even the police are baffled and begin to die. One police detective is so angry that his fellow officers are being tortured and killed that he vows to find the killer or killers no matter what the cost. It is a very intriguing premise that fascinated me, that people would find these flowers and hours later would be found dead. The secret behind the flowers, why they died, and the who done it, all of it, and for the reasons why they did it is what this book is about. And mystery after mystery is revealed. It just continues to add more mystery to it, which kept me reading. This is not a cozy mystery, but it's not like a dark graphic thriller either. I think it rests somewhere comfortably in between those two. And the main characters are very they're good characters. I love a good character, and they intrigued me enough to keep reading. Um, and this was a very solid a solid mystery that I enjoyed reading. I would give it a solid 3 to 4 star rating, which is kind of where Goodreads has it right now. And but what I liked about it is it felt like it took a very original approach to a murder mystery, and how the murders were being done. I can't say more than that without giving away spoilers, but I thought it was really good and gave me the creeps at all the right moments. And every time a black orchid would show up in the book, it would scare me. I'd be like, oh no, who's gonna die next? And nobody touch it, that kind of thing. And it was all that you would want to find a thrilling read. The fourth book I read this week is called George Eliot, The Last Victorian by Kathryn Hughes, and it's a biography of George Eliot. And she is one of my favorite Victorian writers. I have a bunch, but she's probably top 10 for sure. One of my favorite books of hers is Silas Marner. I thought Mill on the Floss was good. I thought Middlemarch was good. I've read most of her books. I know there's a couple I haven't finished yet. I was reading Daniel Deronda last year, but then I had to DNF it. I just wasn't getting into it. I don't think it was her fault. I was reading quite a bit at the time, and sometimes I got to be careful because sometimes I read too much at one time, and my brain just begins to shut out books that, and then I realize, okay, I got to slow down here. It's not a race. Anyway, I had just lost the plot thread on that, and I had no idea what was going on. I think I was listening to an audiobook. So in this case, I'm not sure that was as helpful to me because I needed to take some time to savor it. So I'm gonna come back to that book sometime down the road. But yeah, those are some of my favorite George Eliot. And this is a pretty straightforward biography. I felt like I understood who she was a lot more. George Eliot was certainly a controversial figure for the Victorian age, being that, uh, you know, living with another man and taking somebody else's husband and all the things that we look at as scandalous. But I think Kathryn Hughes does a great job of explaining a lot of her personal things and personal life in a way that makes her, to me, a little more sympathetic as a person and understanding why, having a fair approach to her, and that not that she was just a loose woman with low morals. The heart's going to love what the heart loves, I guess. But all that aside, George Eliot is a fascinating character. She's a brilliant writer, and I can't really think any of the books I've read of her so far that I haven't enjoyed, at least on some level, and that keeps me wanting to come back for more. So I don't know if you like George Eliot, and do you have some favorite George Eliot books that you've read, or are you not on the George Eliot train? Let me know in the comments below. Now, speaking of classics, I did it. I managed to read 2 chapters of Emma, and of course, I forgot to grab my book. It's not with me at the moment, so I can't read any quotes from it. But I read chapters 5 and 6, and for me, this is where the plot really begins to pick up. Now, I just loved these 2 chapters. I laughed, all that. Just quickly, chapter 5. Mr. Knightley and Mrs. Weston, again, Emma's former governess, are discussing Emma, and Mr. Knightley doesn't think that the relationship with Emma and Harriet is a good one, and he doesn't approve of it. Which, okay, he's got his reasons why, and I got to tell you, I'm going to be spoiling some Emma plot points here, so just so you know, if you haven't read the book, you might want to go ahead and skip this part, because I want to bring in future plot lines of this book to how it informs my earlier reading, since this is a reread. But it's funny that Mr. Knightley has a very particular interest in Emma. And in fact, in the book, he says that she is, she's beautiful. Emma is beautiful, but he's concerned about her character, and he doesn't think having this relationship with Harriet and Emma is good, because Harriet is nothing but flattering towards Emma, and the last thing she needs is yet another person flattering her constantly. You know what? I want to read this quote. Hold on. Mrs. Weston points out something I think that's worth thinking about. She says that, her response to Mr. Knightley is she thinks that it is good for Emma to have a friend. She says, Mr. Weston would undoubtedly support me if he were here, for he thinks exactly as I do on the subject. We were speaking of it only yesterday, and agreeing how fortunate it was for Emma that there should be such a girl in Highbury for her to associate with. Mr. Knightley, I shall not allow you to be a fair judge in this case. You are so much used to live alone that you do not know the value of a companion, and perhaps no man can be a good judge of the comfort a woman feels in the society of one of her own sex, after being used to it all her life. I can imagine your objection to Harriet Smith. She is not the superior young woman which Emma's friend ought to be, but on the other hand, as Emma wants to see her better informed, it will be an inducement to her to read more herself. They will read together. She means it, I know. Okay, and then before I get to that point, Mr. Knightley responds back with, Emma has been meaning to read more ever since she was 12 years old. And they go on talking about how she's put together many good lists of books that she wants to read, but that's all they've ever been, is just lists. And I love that. But what Mrs. Weston says is, I think, interesting, that it's good for Emma to have a friend, and a female friend, because companionship is important. And that, yes, she's not on her level, but Emma is hoping to improve her, and maybe through this Emma will learn something herself, which in fact I think she does, but not necessarily what Mrs. Weston is thinking. Maybe she is, but Emma in fact will learn a lot through her time being friends with Harriet. Chapter 6 is great, because now we see her Emma beginning to make attempt to be a matchmaker and match up Mr. Elton, the vicar, with Harriet. And he's such a comical character. He's just really kind of annoying. He's popping up here and there. So Emma has this plan that, I will paint or draw a portrait of Harriet, and I'll invite Mr. Elton to come along so he has an excuse to stare at Harriet while Emma is painting. And he's just being really obnoxious through the whole ordeal. Every single stroke that Emma makes, Mr. Elton gasps in ecstasy, about how brilliant it is. Now, when I first watched the movie, because that was my first experience with this, was the Gwyneth Paltrow version, I completely bought into the storyline that Mr. Elton was in love with Harriet. I bought it hook, line, and sinker. Now, again, spoilers are coming, so if you haven't read the book, definitely skip. But later on in the book, when he proposes to Emma, when I first saw the film, I was shocked. I thought, "What? Whoa! What did I get this wrong?" And it was brilliant how Jane Austen, and I think that film is a pretty faithful adaptation of the book. I probably would have been tricked the same way if I had read the book first. I just think he's this obnoxious little hyperactive man-child that is head over heels in love with Harriet. And it could be that the book actually, well, I don't know. I'll have to keep an eye on that to see if I would have been tricked by it if I had read it first, as I was with the film. I would think I would, because like even with mysteries, I don't often guess the whodunit part. But anyway, I love that everybody comes by and is saying, complimentary things about Emma and her painting ability. And Mr. Knightley comes by and all he says is, "You've made her too tall," which I love. The audiobook I was listening to, the reader made him sound almost a little condescending, which that's not necessarily how I read it. Again, the movie informs me, because in the movie, Jeremy Northam, who's perfect Mr. Knightley in my book, he says it almost playfully, almost like he's baiting her a little bit. He's being very, very playful with the line, which I think sits a little better with me, that he's not coming out, a little too mansplainy, if you will. It's like these two, they like to have that verbal mental sparring with each other that really helps drive their relationship. And so, of course, everybody's complimenting her. So Mr. Knightley feels like it's his duty to say something negative to perhaps keep her pride and vanity in check. Is it even his responsibility to do that? Well, we could debate that all day, I suppose. But knowing that I think Mr. Knightley is in love with Emma, I think he's trying to help her be the best of who she is, of who she can be. So that's another thing I think I'll watch closely to see how it plays out in the chapters ahead. But some really good comedy from Jane Austen happening here. Really enjoyed chapters 5 and 6 this week, and I'm going to try to start kicking through this book a little bit quicker this coming week, just to get the pace going. But if not, no stress, I'm just enjoying the read. So that's my thoughts on Emma chapter 5 and 6. And that's what I've read. Those are the books I finished this week. I've got a bunch more on my bookshelf that I'm reading and enjoying, and it's likely I'll have a couple more to tell you about next Saturday. So stay tuned. So that's it for now. And in the meantime, I hope that you are reading good books, and let me know below if you like George Eliot and what are some of your favorite books that she's written. We'll keep the conversation going down below. And so until next time, happy reading. Take care.